Many people carry a quiet belief that they rarely examine. The belief goes something like this: if I stay calm, if I'm fair, if I'm articulate and reasonable, things will work out. People will respond in kind. Conflict will de escalate. I'll be treated with respect. For a long time, this belief feels true. It's often rewarded early in life, in families, in schools, in professional environments, and being composed and cooperative is praised. You learn that emotional regulation equals maturity, and maturity equals safety. Then one day it fails. You remain calm, you speak carefully, you're fair, even generous, and the response you get makes no sense. I want to tell you about a woman I'll call Sarah. Sarah is the person everyone wants as a coworker or partner. She's the circuit breaker in her family. Recently, she went into a meeting with a supervisor who had been undermining her. She prepared, she had notes, she practiced her I statements. She walked in with a heart rate of 60 beats per minute, determined to be the most reasonable person in the room. 10 minutes later, she walked out shaking. Not because she lost her temper, she didn't, but because her supervisor had taken her calm, factual points and twisted them into evidence that Sarah was cold, condescending, and not a team player. Sarah did everything the therapy books told her to do, and it was used as a weapon against her. This is the reasonableness trap. Take a moment and notice what happened to Sarah internally. She didn't walk out thinking this person is irrational. She walked out wondering, what did I do wrong? And that's the trap. When reasonableness fails, emotionally mature people don't get angry first. They get confused, and then they get self-critical. They replay the conversation. They analyze their tone. They wonder if they were too direct or not direct enough, or somehow missed the right emotional combination that would have made this go differently. The destabilization doesn't come from the conflict itself. It comes from the collapse of the internal rule they've been living by. If I behave well, I will be treated well. You're met with hostility, distortion, aggression, or emotional chaos. Instead of calming the situation, your composure seems to provoke it. Instead of being heard, you're talked over, misrepresented, or even attacked. And the most destabilizing part isn't the behavior itself, it's the confusion. Because you did everything right. This is the moment many emotional mature people struggle to make sense of. They don't feel wrong, but they feel disoriented. The rules they thought govern human interaction suddenly don't apply. And without realizing it, they begin questioning their own clarity, rather than questioning the assumption that clarity guarantees safety. Today, I want to talk about why being reasonable does not make you safe. Not because reasonableness is a flaw, not because emotional maturity is a liability, but because calm behavior does not regulate irrational systems, and fairness does not neutralize power. To understand this, we need to separate two things that often get confused: internal coherence and external outcome. This distinction matters more than most people realize because most of us were taught to collapse these two things into one. We were taught that being regulated, fair, and thoughtful would produce good outcomes, not just reflect good character. That behaving well was a way of managing the environment, not just ourselves. And when those outcomes don't materialize, the assumption isn't the system is broken. The assumption is my regulation must be insufficient. Reasonableness is an internal achievement. It reflects emotional regulation, cognitive integration, and the ability to tolerate discomfort without losing orientation. It's a sign of maturity, but it's not a social force field. It does not automatically shape how others behave. It does not override emotional dysregulation in the people around you, and it does not dissolve power dynamics just by being present. Many people unconsciously treat reasonableness as a kind of social contract. If I show up regulated, others will meet me there. If I'm fair, fairness will be reciprocated. If I'm calm, the situation will calm down. That belief makes sense in environments where emotional regulation is shared. It works in systems that value mutual accountability. It functions in relationships where power is relatively balanced and maturity is distributed. But it fails in systems driven by emotional dominance rather than emotional maturity. And that is where many people get blindsided. One of the most counterintuitive psychological realities is this that the most emotionally dominant person in a room is often the least regulated one. Intensity, volatility, accusation, and emotional flooding command attention. They force response. Calm speech does not automatically compete with that. In fact, it's often drowned out by it. You've seen this play out in real time. The meeting where the calm person is carefully explaining context and the emotionally explosive person interrupts, raises their voice, and suddenly they become the center of gravity. The room shifts toward them, not because they're right, but because they're loud, urgent, and destabilizing. Emotional dominance works the same way a fire alarm does. It overrides everything else. And calm reasoning does not silence the alarm. It gets drowned out by it. This is why emotionally mature people are often shocked by how little their composure protects them. They are operating under a model of interaction that assumes shared regulation, but the system they are in is operating on emotional leverage. And leverage is not interested in fairness. It's interested in control, relief, or discharge. What does emotional leverage look like in the wild? It's the person who uses their fragility to stop you from bringing up a grievance. It's the standard issue rage that makes everyone in the house walk on eggshells. In these systems, the reasonable person is actually a vital organ for the unreasonable person. You are the processor. They output the raw, toxic data of their emotions, and they rely on you to filter it, organize it, and head it back in a form that they can tolerate. The moment you stop doing that, the moment you use your reason to set a boundary instead of to help them, is the moment the leverage turns into an attack. Most people didn't volunteer for this role. They learned it early. They learned that staying regulated kept the peace, that being the interpreter prevented explosions, that if they could just stay calm enough, everyone else would survive the moment. What begins as adaptation quietly becomes expectation, and then obligation. By the time they realize what's happening, they aren't just participating in the system, they are holding it together. When someone is emotionally dysregulated, your calmness does not feel reassuring. It can feel exposing. It can feel invalidating. It can feel like a mirror they did not ask to look into. Let's look at the neurobiology here for a second. When someone is operating from a place of high emotional dysregulation, their amygdala, that's the brain's alarm system, is screaming, literally screaming. They are in a state of threat. When you respond with calm, slow speech and logical reasoning, you aren't offering them a bridge. You're offering them a contrast. To a dysregulated brain, your calm feels like a power play. It feels like you are winning the emotional landscape by remaining untouched while they are drowning. Since they can't regulate themselves to meet you, their only survival mechanism is to try to dysregulate you so that the environment feels fair again to them. They need you to explode so they can say, "See, you're the problem too." This is where projection enters the picture. Projection is not simply blaming others, it's the externalization of internal discomfort. When someone can't tolerate their own confusion, their own shame, or loss of control, they unconsciously push it outward. A calm, coherent person becomes an ideal target for that process, not because they did anything wrong, but because they are stable enough to hold the projection. Your clarity can be experienced as judgment, even when no judgment is present. Your composure can be experienced as superiority, even when no superiority is intended. Your refusal to escalate can be experienced as a provocation. You see, this is deeply confusing for people who believe that good behavior guarantees good outcomes. They think, if I just explain myself better, if I stay calm longer, if I become even more fair, this will resolve. Often it does not. In fact, it can make things worse, because the issue is not misunderstanding. It's not lack of information. It's not tone. It's emotional imbalance and power asymmetry. Fairness does not flatten hierarchy. Calmness does not dissolve dominance. Reason does not override emotional leverage. And this is one of the hardest truths for emotionally mature people to accept because it violates a deeply moralized belief that goodness protects. Many people grow up learning that being the adult in the room is the highest position, that if you are reasonable, others will eventually recognize it, that integrity wins. Sometimes it does, but not always and not everywhere. In emotionally mature systems, being the most regulated person often comes with a social cost. You may be expected to absorb chaos without protest. You may be expected to explain yourself endlessly. You may be positioned as the container for others' emotions simply because you are capable of holding them. This is what I call the competence penalty. Because you can handle it, you are given more to handle. In families, this looks like the stable sibling being told to just let it go when the volatile sibling acts out because you're the bigger person. But being the bigger person shouldn't mean being a larger target. When we equate reasonableness with tolerance for mistreatment, we aren't practicing emotional maturity. We are practicing high functioning codependency. We are using our regulation to keep an unregulated system afloat at our own expense. This is why so many emotionally mature people feel exhausted rather than empowered. Their regulation isn't being used to support mutual growth. It's being used to stabilize dysfunction. And no amount of personal insight fixes a system that depends on your self-erasure to function. And when you finally name a boundary, it can feel shocking to those who relied on your silence. And this is where confusion often turns inward. Emotionally mature people tend to assume that if something goes wrong, they must have missed something, said something poorly, failed to be clear, failed to be patient enough. They look for the error inside themselves. But what they often miss is that the system itself was never designed to reward coherence. It was designed to reward emotional force. This doesn't mean that reasonableness is useless. It means it was misassigned a job it can't perform. Reasonableness stabilizes you. It doesn't control others. Safety doesn't come from behaving well enough to prevent harm. It comes from accurately perceiving the system you're in. That's a difficult shift because it requires letting go of a comforting illusion, the illusion that if you just do things right, outcomes will follow. But reality is more complex. You can be ethical and still be targeted. You can be fair and still be overridden. You can be calm and still be punished. None of that invalidates your maturity, none of it. It reveals the limits of the environment. This is where many people mistakenly slide into cynicism. They conclude but that being reasonable is pointless or that emotional maturity is weakness. But that's not the lesson here. That's not the lesson. The lesson is discernment. Discernment isn't about becoming guarded, it's about becoming observant. Before you engage, before you explain, before you bring your full clarity into the room, you pause long enough to ask what kind of system you're stepping into. Is there a history of reciprocity? Has this person ever changed their mind based on new information? Is the goal resolution or discharge? Is this person trying to solve a problem or just trying to get the emotional acid out of their system? What is the price of my composure? If staying calm requires me to lie to myself or minimize my own reality, that price is too high. If the answer to these suggests you are in an irrational system, your reasonableness needs to shift from engagement mode to protection mode. Knowing when reasonableness is appropriate and when it's being exploited. Knowing when calm engagement is useful and when disengagement is the coherent response. There's a difference between being grounded and being exposed. Being grounded means you are oriented within yourself. Being exposed means you're offering access in a system that cannot use it responsibly. Boundaries are not a failure of reason, they are an application of it. Distance, it's not immaturity, it's often clarity. And one of the most stabilizing realizations for emotionally mature people is this: And safety was never guaranteed by behavior. It was always contextual. So when you stop expecting your regulation to regulate others, something shifts. You stop bargaining emotionally. You stop over explaining. You stop waiting for recognition that may never come. And paradoxically, you actually become more stable because your coherence is no longer contingent on outcomes. You are reasonable because it aligns with who you are, not because it ensures reciprocity. And that distinction matters. It allows you to remain ethical without being naive, calm without being compliant, clear without being exposed. The goal is not to harden yourself. It's not to become suspicious or defensive. It's to see clearly, to recognize that some environments reward maturity and some exploit it. Some people respond to calm with calm, and some experience it as threat. That, that's not a personal failure. It's a psychological reality. When you understand this, confusion gives way to orientation. You stop asking, why didn't this work? And start asking, what kind of system am I in? And that question changes everything. Because coherence was never about controlling the storm, it was about staying anchored inside it. Being reasonable does not make you safe, but it does make you coherent. And coherence, when paired with discernment, is what actually allows you to move through irrational systems without losing yourself. That's not as comforting as the myth we were taught, but it's far more stabilizing and far more real.